Right now, a battle for control of the U.S. economy is being fought not on Wall Street, but inside the Supreme Court. On one side is the White House, determined to force economic growth at any cost. On the other is the Federal Reserve, the traditional guardian of the nation's financial stability. And this conflict is no longer a war of words. In January 2026, it has escalated into a direct, legal assault. The Trump administration is leveraging a criminal investigation into the Fed's own chairman and, in a case the Supreme Court is hearing this week, is attempting to fire a sitting Federal Reserve governor for the first time in history. At stake in this fight is the 70-year-old principle of an independent central bank, a principle designed to protect your money from short-term political ambition. The outcome of this struggle will directly impact the value of your savings, the interest rate on your mortgage, and the security of your job. The collision is here. The only question left is who will pay the price. To understand the gravity of this moment, you first have to understand the core functions of these two institutions. For decades, the relationship between the White House and the Federal Reserve has been an uneasy but necessary partnership. Think of the economy as a high-performance car. The White House controls the gas pedal through fiscal policy, government spending, and taxes. When a president wants to accelerate the economy, they push down hard. They cut taxes and ramp up government spending to create jobs and boost growth. This is the heart of the Trump administration's agenda, a high-growth philosophy designed to push the economic engine into overdrive. But that car also has a brake pedal. That brake is the Federal Reserve. The Fed's job is not to win elections, but to manage monetary policy. It has a dual mandate from Congress: keep employment high, and most importantly, keep prices stable. Price stability means controlling inflation. When the economy overheats, too much money chases too few goods and prices rise. The value of your dollar shrinks. This is where the Fed steps in. By raising its key interest rate, it makes borrowing more expensive for everyone, cooling the economy to prevent inflation from spiraling. It taps the brakes. For this system to work, one principle has been held sacred: the independence of the Federal Reserve. The idea is to insulate monetary policy from the pressure of an election cycle. The Fed must be able to make unpopular decisions, like raising interest rates, without fear of being fired by a president demanding a short-term economic boom. This independence is the bedrock of a stable U.S. dollar. What we're seeing in 2026 is a wrecking ball aimed at that wall of independence. The administration isn't just disagreeing with the Fed's decisions, it's using the power of the executive branch to dismantle the barrier between political ambition and monetary policy. But what happens when that sacred principle is no longer respected? The tug-of-war between a president demanding growth and a Fed fearing inflation is a drama that has played out before. These past clashes provide chilling context for the events of today. Go back to the Korean War in the early 1950s. President Harry Truman wanted to hold down interest rates to finance the war cheaply. The Fed, led by Chairman Thomas McCabe, warned this would ignite inflation. Truman was furious, hauling the entire Fed board to the White House to demand their compliance. The conflict led to the historic 1951 Treasury-Fed Accord, a landmark agreement establishing the central bank's independence from political demands. It was a peace treaty designed to end these wars. But that peace was fragile. In 1965, President Lyndon Johnson was funding both the Vietnam War and his quote-unquote Great Society programs. When Fed Chairman William McChesney Martin Jr. raised interest rates to cool the overheating economy, an enraged Johnson summoned him to his Texas ranch. Accounts of the meeting are legendary. Johnson, enraged, reportedly used his infamous physical presence to intimidate the Fed chairman. For a time, it worked. Perhaps the most damaging example occurred under Richard Nixon. Desperate to ensure his 1972 re-election, Nixon privately pressured Fed Chairman Arthur Burns to, quote, juice the economy. Secret White House tapes captured Nixon demanding easy money. Burns folded. He slashed interest rates, the economy boomed, and Nixon won in a landslide. But that decision unleashed one of the most painful economic periods in modern American history, the quote, Great Inflation of the 1970s. It was a brutal lesson in what happens when the Fed's independence is compromised. But is it a lesson that's been forgotten? Even during his first term, Donald Trump publicly attacked his own appointee, Fed Chair Jerome Powell, shattering the modern tradition of presidents refraining from comment on monetary policy. What's happening now in 2026 is on a different level. This is no longer name-calling. It is a direct, legal, and structural assault on the institution itself. The early fights were about influencing the referee. This one is about firing him. This brings us to the situation today. The collision is playing out on three distinct fronts: the president's economic agenda, the Federal Reserve's mandate, and a legal war being fought up to the Supreme Court. First, the White House agenda. The administration is committed to aggressive economic growth through extended tax cuts, deregulation, and tariffs. The stated goal is to sustain GDP growth above 3%. This is the gas pedal, pushed to the floor. Now consider the Fed's dilemma. Chairman Jerome Powell is looking at a different dashboard. Inflation remains stubbornly above the Fed's 2% target, particularly in the service sector. And many economists warn that the full inflationary impact of tariffs imposed in 2025 has yet to be felt. This puts Powell in an impossible position. The White House is demanding policies that would pour fuel on an inflationary fire. Yet the Fed's legal mandate is to maintain price stability. The textbook response would be to hold interest rates high or even raise them further. But doing so would directly sabotage the president's agenda and risk a recession. The administration's response has been unprecedented. First, the Department of Justice is conducting a criminal investigation into Jerome Powell himself, officially over potential perjury related to the Fed headquarters renovation costs. Powell has publicly decried the probe as a politically motivated pretext, a tool of intimidation for setting interest rates based on data, not politics. Second, and more structurally significant, is the case now before the Supreme Court, the administration's attempt to fire Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook. The president moved to oust Cook in 2025, citing for cause, based on unproven allegations of past misconduct, which Cook denies. The Federal Reserve Act allows removal for cause, but the term has never been legally tested, and no president has ever attempted to fire a governor in the Fed's history. Lower courts blocked the firing, but the administration appealed. The justices are now hearing arguments in a case that could fundamentally rewrite the rules of Fed independence. A ruling for the administration could empower a president to remove any governor who stands in their way, effectively ending the Fed as an independent body. If you're getting value from this analysis of the forces shaping your financial future, take a moment to subscribe. Staying informed is the first step to being prepared for what comes next. The outcome of this unprecedented clash leads down one of two very painful paths. There is no easy exit. Each road leads to a different kind of economic nightmare, and the only question is who bears the cost. First, what happens if the Fed caves? In this scenario, the pressure campaign succeeds. The Supreme Court could rule that the president can fire governors, or the constant political attacks simply become too much for Powell and the board. The Fed loses its independence. To stimulate the economy, the Fed would be forced to cut interest rates, even as fiscal policy fans the flames of inflation. In the short term, this might feel good. The stock market could rally and GDP might spike. The administration would declare victory. But this is the road back to the 1970s. By prioritizing a short-term sugar high, we would risk unleashing runaway inflation. That's not a number on a chart. It's a thief in your wallet that robs every household. Your salary would feel like it's shrinking every month as the cost of gas, groceries, and rent climbs relentlessly. The economy could then plunge into stagflation, the toxic combination of stagnant growth and high inflation. Businesses, unable to plan, would stop investing. Unemployment would rise, but prices would remain painfully high. This is the worst of all worlds. This path punishes savers, retirees, and working families. But what if they don't cave? What if the Fed holds the line? In this scenario, the Fed's independence survives. The Supreme Court could rule for Lisa Cook, affirming that governors cannot be fired for political disagreements. Vindicated by the court and committed to their mandate, Chairman Powell and the board defy the president. To fight the inflationary pressures from the administration's policies, the Fed would do its job. It would raise interest rates sharply. This is the brutal but necessary medicine to bring inflation to heel. The consequences would be fast and severe. Higher interest rates would slam the brakes on the economy. The housing market would seize up. Business investment would grind to a halt. Corporate profits would fall, and the stock market would likely enter a deep correction. To save the economy from the long-term cancer of inflation, the Fed would be forced to induce a short-term heart attack, a full-blown recession. The administration's growth agenda would be dead on arrival. As the economy shrinks, companies would lay off workers and unemployment would jump. This path punishes borrowers, homeowners, and anyone whose job depends on economic growth. One path is the slow, corrosive pain of inflation. The other is the sharp, immediate pain of a recession. This is the choice we face in 2026, brought on by a political war against a vital American institution. We are witnessing the inevitable result of a decades-long conflict. The tension between presidential ambition and Federal Reserve independence has finally erupted into open warfare. This is a real-time stress test of the institutions that underpin the U.S. economy. On one side is a president who views the Fed not as an independent partner, but as a subordinate agency that must serve his political agenda. On the other is an institution under an unprecedented legal and political assault, tasked with the unpopular job of protecting the long-term value of our money. Do not mistake the investigation into Jerome Powell or the Supreme Court case over Lisa Cook as political theater. That is the main event. They represent a direct challenge to the 1951 Accord that has, for over 70 years, largely kept monetary policy out of politicians' hands. The ultimate risk isn't just a recession or an inflation spike, it's the erosion of trust in the U.S. financial system itself. Global investors are watching. If the Fed is seen as just another political tool, confidence in the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency could be permanently damaged. The two paths forward are both perilous. A politically compromised Fed could drag us into 1970s-style stagflation. A Fed that fights back could be forced to trigger a deep and painful recession. The decisions made in Washington's courtrooms and boardrooms in the coming months will define the economic reality for years to come. We are living through a pivotal moment. But what do you think? Is the Federal Reserve an unaccountable body that needs to be brought under political control? Or is its independence the only thing standing between us and economic chaos? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And thanks for watching.